Well, good morning, Gwinnett Church. Happy Mother's Day. Can we just give it up one more time for all the moms in the room this morning? Hey, before we jump in, I just wanted to speak to the moms for a second. Moms, I just wanted to say thank you. We are so grateful for you, and I know that your job is oftentimes a thankless job. No one, your 5-year-old doesn't usually stop and go, hey, Mom, thanks so much for loving me. You're the greatest ever. They might, but your teenager definitely doesn't. So I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you for all that you do and for all that you are. One day out of the calendar year is not nearly enough to say thank you, but it's the least that we could do. So on behalf of Gwinnett Church, thank you. We're so grateful for you. If we haven't had a chance to meet, my name is GERALD FADAYOMI, and I'm so excited to be here with us in week 3 of this series that we've been in called #Goals. If you haven't had a chance to go and watch the other 2 weeks of the series, you need to go and watch them. They are incredible. They're profoundly helpful, and I hope that you'll go and watch them because I think they will help lead you as you continue to grow in your relationship and as you continue to follow Jesus. I'm excited for where we're going to head today because where we're going to head today has been really helpful for me. And I believe that it'll also be helpful for you. So since we're in a series called #Goals, I thought it'd be appropriate for me to tell you about a goal of mine in my life that did not last for very long. I had a goal to be a professional photographer, and that lasted for about 24 hours. I borrowed a friend of mine's camera. I went down to Atlanta. I took pictures for a day, and I quickly realized that using a professional camera is a lot harder than using an iPhone, and so I gave up on being a photographer, but my love for pictures and my love for a good picture has never faded. I love a good picture. Anyone else in the room love a good picture? Yeah, I love a good picture when the lighting is right and I can get a great picture of me and my wife or me and my friends or me and my brothers or a great picture of nature or a great picture of a building. I just love a really good picture. In fact, I will do just about anything for a good picture. Last December, my wife and I decided that we were going to do a road trip from Atlanta to Denver. Denver is about 19 and a half hours away, one way in a car, so it's about a 40-hour road trip that we were committing to because Denver was on our bucket list and we really wanted to go. So we planned out this trip to go to Denver. The problem, though, was that it was over Christmas break, and so we needed to go to Chicago to see her mom's side of the family before we could make it to Denver. And so we started mapping out our trip and decided that we would drive from Atlanta to Nashville, from Nashville to Chicago, from Chicago to Wisconsin, from Wisconsin to Iowa, from Iowa to Mount Rushmore so I could get a picture in front of Mount Rushmore because I needed the picture. And then we would drive from Mount Rushmore to Denver and then drive across Kansas back to Atlanta. One of the greatest trips of our lives. We packed everything into our 4-door Hyundai Elantra 2014 2-wheel drive for a road trip through the north in December. So we pack up our car, we drive to Nashville. Nashville's amazing. Spend the night with our mentor. We wake up in the morning, have breakfast with them. We leave Nashville and we start our trek to Chicago. And on the way from Nashville to Chicago, we hit this substance I've never seen or heard of before. It was called freezing fog. Anyone heard of that? Yeah, I don't really understand it. It was foggy, but it wasn't freezing. I didn't really get it, but it was a thing. And so we drive through this freezing fog. We get to Chicago. We spend a couple of days there for Christmas. It was amazing. We pack everything up. We drive up to Wisconsin to see my wife's dad's side of the family. We spend about 2 hours in Wisconsin because that's about all the time you need in Wisconsin. If you're from Wisconsin, I'm sorry. Not that I made fun of it, but that you're from there. And so so mean. So we go up to Wisconsin, we spend 2 hours there, and then we proceed to drive from Wisconsin to the only state in the U.S. who might be worse than Wisconsin, to Iowa. And on our way to Iowa, we hit another substance that I wasn't very familiar with other than at Dairy Queen. We ran into a blizzard. Now, this blizzard wasn't bad. It was mild. It was about 10 miles an hour wind, light snow. So I was able to kind of, get through it, drive my wife and I through it safely. And I was like, you know what? If this is as bad as it's going to be, then we're really off to a great start. This trip is going to be phenomenal. So we drive through it. We get to where we're staying in Iowa in the middle of nowhere. About 5 hours later, it's 10 o'clock p.m., and we're pulling into this house that we're supposed to be staying at. Now, I don't know why my wife thought this was a good idea, but for some reason, she thought it was a good idea to let me book the Airbnb that we were going to be staying at in the middle of Narnia, Iowa. Why she thought that was a good idea, I don't know. But being the good husband that I am, I said, let's make an adventure out of this. So I found the greatest Airbnb you could ever book, a vintage 1800s Airbnb. I think I missed in the description, though, that when they said vintage 1800s, what they meant is that nobody had touched it since the 1800s. And so we walk into this Airbnb, and I kid you not, it smells like an animal has died in the living room. And my wife is looking at me, and she is like, we are not staying here. And I was like, we paid for this. We are staying here. And so we walk into the bedroom. We put our stuff down on the bed. And at this point, I started to side with my wife because I looked around the bedroom, and what I realized is that there were portraits of people who looked like they died in the early 1700s, and they were all looking directly at the bed, as if they were waiting for us to fall asleep. At that point, I pulled my wallet out of my pocket, quickly removed my man card, tossed it out the window, and said, babe, we're going to a hotel. She said, you're right, we're going to a hotel. I told you from the beginning, you should have listened to me in the first place. Lesson number 1 of marriage, listen to your wife. So we get in the car, and we drive to a hotel. We spend the night at the hotel. We wake up in the morning. We're eating breakfast together, and a news report comes on that says Winter Storm Ebony is on the way. So in that moment, we have 2 options. We can either get in the car and try to beat the storm and get out in front of it, or we can spend another night in Narnia, Iowa. So I look at my wife, Kylie, and she looks at me, and I said, baby, pack your bags. Ebony ain't got nothing on May. We are beating this storm. And so we get in the car. I'm driving at a speed that I can't say because I'm a pastor. I got Hillsong on full blast, and I am going. This storm is not going to catch me. We make it to South Dakota. It's amazing. And as soon as we crossed the line, the state line, Ebony came and said, hey, at full speed. 30-mile-an-hour winds. Snow pouring at a rapid rate, and it is moving around our car like this. And on the inside, I'm like, we're gonna die. But on the outside, I'm like, thug life, I didn't choose it, it chose me. Baby, we good, I got you, right? That lasted for 15 minutes before I realized if we don't stop, we are going to die. And the news report will read, Black pastor dies in South Dakota in Winter Storm Ebony. So we pull off to Mitchell, South Dakota, which is known for one thing, it's Corn Palace. If you don't know what that is, it's a palace made of corn. That's literally it. We spend the night there. We wake up in the morning, and my wife says, hey, why don't we just drive to Denver and let's skip Mount Rushmore? And I think in my mind, no, you don't understand. I have to get this picture. We're going to Mount Rushmore. And so we get in the car, and we proceed to drive 45 miles an hour on a highway with a speed limit of 80 miles an hour for 8 hours to get to Mount Rushmore at sunset and to get this picture. Right. I'm like, if that's not a Christmas card, I don't know what is. We love this picture so much, we're just gonna send it to anyone who wants it. So if you want a Christmas card, just ask me, we'll hook you up. We'll send you one this year. So we take this picture in front of Mount Rushmore. We drive down to Denver. We have a great few days. We drive across Kansas, and we make it back to Atlanta. I was thinking about this road trip that we got a chance to go on. I was thinking about this series, #Goals. And here's what I was reminded of, this simple truth, that we all have a picture in our minds that we are willing to do whatever it takes to get to, don't we? And we would drive through storms, through blizzards, through freezing fog, and we would fight our way through an 1800s Airbnb so that we could get to the picture that we have in mind. We call those pictures goals. And we all have one. And maybe your picture is around your relationships. That's what we talked about week 1, that we have a picture or a goal for our relationships. Maybe what a relationship should look like. Maybe a relationship that we want to be in. Maybe what our marriage should look like or what we want it to look like. Maybe what our relationships with our kids could and should look like. Maybe the picture that you have is around your work life and your career. And you have a picture for the career change that you want to make, or the way that you want things to work in the office, or the way that you want your company to run, or an expansion that you want to be a part of. Maybe the picture that you have is for your kids and for their future, for who they're going to be, for what their character is going to be, for the college that they'll go to, for the type of person that they'll marry. Maybe your picture is around your friendships. And it's the type of people that you want in your life. For some of you, you want your picture to be literally like Friends, where you guys all live in the same neighborhood and you share each other's sugar. For others of you, you're like, my picture is to have one friend that I talk to once a year, and that's all I want. Maybe you have a picture around your faith, and that's why you're here this morning, because you have a picture of what a relationship with God could look like or what it should look like. Here's the thing, I don't know what your picture is. I don't know what your goals are. But what I love about this series is the reality that we all have them. That this series speaks to a need that all of us feel, that we all have goals, areas of our life where we want to grow, areas of our life where we want to get better, pictures that we have imagined for years, maybe from the time that you were a little kid, that we are working towards. And for the last few weeks, we've talked about some specific goals, but what I wanted to do this week is kind of pull us out of the specific goals and go to a 30,000-foot view and look at goals in general, because I think as we look at our goals, at our pictures, there's a question that we owe it to ourselves to ask before this series is over. And the question is simply this: what if your picture for your future falls short of all that you're meant to experience? What if the picture that you have for your life is less than what you're ultimately meant to do? What if the picture that you have for your career is less than what you're meant to accomplish? What if the picture that you have for your kids is less than what they're meant to become? Essentially, what the question that I want to ask you is this morning is what if your best is less? What if the best possible picture that you could paint for whatever category you're setting goals falls short of what you're ultimately meant to experience? What if your best is less? Now hear me, I'm not saying that having goals is bad, and I'm not saying that you have a bad goal. But I am asking the question, if you were settling, wouldn't you want to know? Like if you were dating someone and everyone knew that you could do better, your family, your friends were all thinking, you can do better than this, you can do better than this, wouldn't you want someone to tell you? And if you had taken a job that was offering to pay you far less than what your actual value was, and everyone knew it but you, wouldn't you want to know? If you were settling in an area of your life, wouldn't you want to know? What if your best is less? That's the question for this morning, and I'm excited to talk about it by looking at an interaction that happens between a guy by the name of Peter and Jesus. If you've grown up in church, you've probably heard of Peter before. We're going to be talking about him for the next couple of weeks, but Peter has this incredible moment where he decides to follow Jesus in Luke chapter 5. Luke is written by a physician named Luke, and Luke did all of this research and studying to figure out the life of Jesus and then write an orderly account of the story of Jesus. And in Luke 5, he writes about this interaction that Jesus and Peter have together, this moment where Peter decides to follow Jesus. I'm going to read through the entire interaction, and then we'll go back and talk about a few things. Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 1, says this. It says, one day, as the crowds were pressing close to him to hear the word of God, Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats moored by the land. The fishermen had gone ashore, and they were washing their nets. He got in one of the boats, and it was Simon's, and he asked him to put it out a little way from the land. He sat down in the boat and he began to teach the crowd. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deeper part and let down your nets for a catch." "Master," replied Simon Peter, "we have been working hard all night and caught nothing at all. But if you say so, I'll let my nets down." When they did so, they caught such a huge number of fish that their nets began to break. They signaled to their partners in the other boats to come and help them. So they came and filled both boats, and they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees, and he said, "Go away from me. Leave me, Lord. I am a sinner." He and all his companions were gripped with amazement at the catch of fish that they had taken. This included James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon Peter. And Jesus responds, he says, "Don't be afraid, Peter. From now on, you'll be catching people." So they brought their boats to the land. They abandoned everything, and they followed Jesus. There's three things that I want us to take away from this interaction between Peter and Jesus. Jesus has this massive crowd of people following him. Everywhere he would go, there would be a crowd. They wanted to see what miracles he was going to do. They wanted to hear the messages that he would teach. His popularity was growing. And in this instance, Jesus knew that he would not be able to project loudly enough for the whole crowd to hear what it was that he needed to say to them. And so he sees these fishermen who are washing their nets, and he jumps into Peter's boat and he says, "Hey, Peter, if you don't mind, I know you're busy, but could you push off a little bit from the shore so that I could use the water to project my voice and the crowd would be able to hear me preach?" And so Peter agrees, and he gets in the boat and rows Jesus out a little bit, and Jesus sits down in the boat and teaches this crowd of people. But when he's done with his sermon, he turns his attention to Peter, and he begins a conversation with him. That's the first thing that I want us to see in this interaction, because I would imagine that in a room like this, there are people who have walked in this morning wondering if God sees you, if God knows you, if he knows the goals that you have, if he knows the plans that you've been planning, if he knows the prayers that you've been praying for your kids or for your job or for a new job, if he knows the relationship troubles that you are facing, if he knows what's going on in your life. I would imagine that there's some of you who are sitting in this room and you feel like you're just another face in the crowd. Like you're just another employee at a job. Like you're just another kid in your school. Like you're just another mom who's been working as hard as you possibly can to keep everything together, but nobody sees you and nobody notices you and nobody thanks you. I would imagine that there's people in the room this morning who are wondering, if I wasn't even here, would anyone notice and would anyone care? And I couldn't go any further without pausing and pointing out this first truth about the way that Jesus operates when it comes to people, is that Jesus has this crowd of people who are vying for his attention, who want to talk to him, who want to see him, and he speaks to the crowd, he pays attention to the crowd. But Jesus, over and over and over again in the New Testament and in this interaction with Peter, he turns his attention from the crowd and he looks to Peter individually. He gets in his boat. He speaks to his need. He talks to Peter directly. I just wanted to remind you this morning of this simple truth, is that God sees you individually, that you are not a face in the crowd, that you're not just another person sitting in a seat at Gwinnett Church, that you are not in this building by mistake and you are not on this planet for no reason. Your breath in your lungs is purpose in your life. God has you here on purpose, for a purpose. He sees you, he knows you, he believes in you, he has plans for you, and as we like to say around Gwinnett Church, he is for you, not against you. And he's in the boat with you this morning, whatever you're going through. So Jesus has this conversation with Peter. He says, "Hey, Peter, would you go out into the deeper waters?" And so Peter goes, "Sure, okay, I guess we can go out into the deep." I imagine Rolling in the Deep by Adele is playing in the background. And so Peter goes out into the deep waters, and when they get there, Jesus says, "Okay, Peter, would you let down your nets for a catch?" Now, I don't know much about fishing. Admittedly, where I'm from, we don't really do a lot of fishing. But I did some research on fishing, and one of the things that I learned is that when you fish at night or early in the morning. You don't fish in the middle of the day because the water is warmer and the fish go lower, and it's harder to catch fish in that part of the day. And so when Jesus says, "Hey, Peter, would you let your nets down for a catch?" Peter, being an experienced fisherman, would go, "Jesus, I don't know if you know how fishing works, but that's not the point of the day that I should really be doing this. But you know what, Jesus? If you say so, if you tell me to let down my nets, I'll let them down for a catch." And so Peter lowers his nets, and according to Luke, there's this miraculous catch of fish that happens. Luke would say a boatload of fish were caught that day, but not just one, two. That Peter catches 2 boatloads of fish, so many fish that he has to call to his friends, "Yo, guys, come over here, help me. I've caught way too many fish. I don't know what to do with this. Help me out. This is crazy." But as this is happening, Peter starts realizing, wait a minute. I've been fishing my entire life. This is not the way that this is supposed to work. Who are you? You're not just some rabbi. You're not just some teacher. There's more to you. And out of fear, Peter goes, "Away from me, Lord. I'm not worthy to be near you. I don't deserve to be in your presence. Away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. I'm a sinner. I can't be in your presence." Peter, in this moment, gets a right-sized view of God, and it starts changing the way that he sees himself. On the outside, this looks negative, but honestly, it's probably the best thing that could have ever happened to Peter, because the reality is that a right-sized view of God will lead to a healthier view of self. And in this moment, Peter starts realizing, oh my goodness, you are so much bigger than I thought you were. You're huge, and I'm small. You're infinite, and I am finite. You are limitless, and I am limited. There is nothing that is too big for you. There is nothing outside of your bounds. Jesus, I don't know who you are or what you're here for, but you are amazing. And I'm humbled to be in your presence. So Peter, out of humility and fear, tries to run away. But Jesus, I love the way he responds. He looks at Peter and he goes, Peter, don't be afraid. Peter, I knew who you were before I got into the boat. Peter, I know everything that there is to know about you. Peter, you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to run away from me. I know you fully, and I still chose to get in the boat with you. Don't run away, Peter. And then he says to Peter the statement that wrecks his life in the best way possible. Peter looks at Jesus and goes, don't be afraid. From now on, you'll fish for people. From now on, you'll be a fisher of men. See, what we have to understand is that Peter, at this point in his life, already had a picture for what his life would be and what his future would be. And most scholars believe that Peter was a fisherman because his dad was a fisherman before him, and so he would have been continuing the family business. That Peter, at this point, was already married, and so he knew that he would live in his small little fishing community, that he would carry out his dad's business, that he would catch fish, sell some to the market, bring some home to feed his family, and that would be Peter's life. He would live in his small town, living a good life. But then Jesus shows up. Jesus walks on the scene with a Messiah lean, and he looks at Jesus and he goes, he looks at Peter and he goes, Peter, I know you have a plan. I know you have a picture for your future. I know you have goals, Peter, but I don't want you to miss this. I have more for you than what you can see for yourself. I have more in store, Peter, than what you have in mind. Peter, I have bigger plans for you. I have bigger dreams for you. I have more influence for you. I have plans to take you places that you never thought you could go, and I have plans to do things in and through you that you never thought were possible. Peter, I have more in store for you than anything you could come up with on your own. That was what was on the table for Peter. So Peter said, okay, well, I don't know what this more is, but I just saw that. And that's not supposed to happen. And so he can do that, then I'm gonna follow him. And so he leaves everything behind and he begins to follow Jesus. Peter at this point would have had no idea that it would have led to him traveling all of the known world. Peter had no idea that at this point in deciding to follow Jesus, that 2,000 years later, we would still be talking about him in churches around the world. Peter had no idea that in saying yes to following Jesus, that there would be churches and cathedrals named after him all over the globe. Peter had no idea that 2,000 years later in Gwinnett County, Georgia, that there would be people sitting in a room who were named after him because he decided to get out of his boat and follow Jesus. You see, God had more in store than what he had in mind, and I believe that same idea is true for us. This is what I want you to walk away with this morning, is that God has more in store than what you have in mind. That whatever picture, dream, goal, or idea that you have for your future, God has more for you on the table. That God really does have more in store than what you have in mind. But I want to be really, really clear about what this is. This isn't like health and wealth. This isn't like, hey, if you follow Jesus, everything's going to be perfect. More is not a mistake-free life. Peter made some massive mistakes. We're going to talk more about that next week. More is more purpose in life. It's waking up every day and knowing that you're on mission for something that's bigger than yourself. More is not a problem-free life. Peter ended up being crucified upside down. This isn't a life void of troubles and problems and disease and hurt and pain. That's not what Jesus is offering. Jesus is offering a life full of meaning. That's more. More is not wealth guaranteed. More is not, hey, if you follow Jesus, all of your financial problems are gonna go away and you're just gonna end up as rich as you wanna be. No. More is a richness to life that money could never buy. That's what Jesus is putting on the table for Peter, and that's what's on the table for you and I. Not a mistake-free, problem-free, wealth-guaranteed life, but a life of more purpose, of more meaning, and a life that's so rich that money could never buy it. Jesus is going, guys, you gotta understand, I have more in store than what you have in mind. And so the question that we have to ask this morning is simply this, is if there's more, if Jesus really does have more in store, if God really does have more in store than what we have in mind, then how do we get in on it? How do we get in on the more? Well, I think the way we get in is the same way that Peter got in. We get out of the boat and we follow Jesus. We follow. We leave some things behind and we choose to move in the direction that God is moving in. We leave some things behind and we choose to say yes to the things that maybe God is calling us to. We leave some things behind and we do things that push us out of our comfort zone. We leave some things behind and we take steps in the direction of Jesus. That's what following is. Simply taking steps in the direction of Jesus. It's simple. It's difficult. It's easy to understand. It's hard to do. Steps in the direction of Jesus. Steps of obedience. We step out and do some things that we don't really want to do. Make some phone calls we don't really want to make some decisions that are hard for us to make. Steps of trust, where we take something that we've been holding on to like this and we go, okay, God, it's yours. Steps of courage, where we step out to do something that is scary for us to do, something that could cost us something that we don't know how it's going to turn out. Following Jesus, steps in his direction. And those steps lead to more. Because following Jesus always leads to more. It's just the way it works. Now, how do I know this? One, because it's Peter's story. Two, because if you go and read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you see interaction after interaction after interaction where Jesus shows up on the scene and they meet Jesus. And as soon as they do, Jesus offers them more to life than they could have ever imagined for themselves. But how do I know this is true? Not just because of the stories that I've read, not just because of the eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus, but because I've seen it with my own eyes. Because I've experienced the more that God had in store for me. You see, I had a picture for my future. My picture was that I'd be a club promoter in Atlanta. I'd throw massive parties all over the city. I would hang out with a bunch of celebrities. I'd eventually make enough money to buy a club of my own, and I would spend all of my time at the night scene in Atlanta. That was the best possible picture that I could paint for myself because my dad left at the 3rd grade and my mom went to jail my junior year in high school, and it was the only way out that I could see. So that was my picture. And then a friend told me about one of our churches. It's called Buckhead Church. I went. And I got face to face with Jesus. And as I did, I started to ask myself the question, okay, well, if God really does have more in store than what I have in mind, if his picture is really better than the picture that I've painted for myself, then maybe I owe it to myself just to at least take a step in his direction and see what happens. So I did, I took a step. And that first step was me leaving some of my friends behind. It was me leaving some people who were leading me to make some really bad decisions. And so I moved out of an apartment, started attending church regularly. I got really plugged in with our churches, and I felt like the next step that I was supposed to take was to sign up to serve and volunteer. And so I started leading a group of high school boys at Inside Out. And I invested in them and poured into them and shared my life experience with them. I didn't know everything that there was to know about the Bible. I still don't. I didn't have all of the answers. I still don't, but I had my experience that I could share. So I stepped in and I served. And I led them for 2 years. And then an opportunity came about for me to join staff, for me to be a part of the church that was so pivotal in my life as a staff member. And so I said, okay, I'm gonna take this step. God, I don't know that I'm qualified to do this. I don't know if I'll even be good at this, but God, I'll take a step and I'll go on staff, sure. And so I did that for 4 years. While I was on staff at one of our churches, I met my wife, Kylie. It's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And we got married, and we moved into this apartment in Roswell that we absolutely loved. It was incredible, but as we started looking at our lives and as we were reading through the Bible and hearing the words of Jesus and just evaluating, like, are we living the way that he's calling us to live? And are there areas in our life where we can set some goals and where we can grow? We started looking at our finances. And I had some debt from school, and we had some cars that weren't paid off, and we had some consumer debt that we needed to figure out. And so we felt like the next step that we needed to take was to be better stewards of the resources that God was giving us. And so we said, hey, let's just see if there's like a basement that we could move into. 30 years old. And so we take a step, and we move into this basement. And 5 months later, right before we go on this epic road trip, we paid off our last bill and found ourselves debt-free. I never thought that was possible for me. I grew up in a family that had no idea how to handle money. I grew up in a family that taught me to handle money in all the wrong ways. I didn't even know that I was supposed to have a savings account until I hit my 20s. But here I am, experiencing more than I ever thought was possible. I ended up going to a prayer cabin with some of my friends after that season, spending some time praying and talking to them about where I was in life. And I wasn't sure what God was calling me to next, but I felt like that maybe there was something more that he wanted me to do. And so we finished our time there, and I felt confidently that God was calling me to leave the job that I loved. 4 years, investing in the students, leading a staff. I loved my job. I did not want to leave. I felt God go, hey, I need you to take a step. Because remember, a few years back, I gave you an idea to do a conference for college students. A conference where they would hear worship and teaching, but not only that they would actually go out and they would serve their community, and they would be my hands and feet. I want you to go and start that. God, I've never started a nonprofit. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to raise the money for that, but if you're telling me to do it, I'll take the step. So I did. In February, I left the job that I loved, called up some churches that I knew, and one agreed at the University of Georgia. So this October, we'll do our first ever conference for college students, our first ever service-based conference, and we're still trying to figure out a ton. But we took a step. And here I am with a business. I never thought that was possible. God had more in store than what I had in mind. And if that wasn't enough, I got this random phone call for some dude who I'd never met in my entire life. He goes, hey, I have an all-expense-paid trip to Israel. Do you want to go? I'm like, duh, yes, I want to go to Israel. And so I get on the plane, I go to Israel, I'm sitting at the Garden Tomb, one of the spots that they think Jesus could have been resurrected from the grave. I'm taking communion with a group of 30 guys who I don't know from Adam. And as I am sitting there, I just feel like the next step that God is calling me to take is to call my dad, which does not seem like that big of a deal for some of you. But for a lot of you, you understand how significant of a phone call this might be. Because the last time I talked to my dad was in the 3rd grade. And here I was 20 years later in a hotel room in Israel on the phone with my father because I took a step. That conversation after 30 minutes ended with my dad saying, hey, I know there's been distance between us and I know I've made some mistakes, but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I never thought I'd hear that. I never thought a relationship with my dad was possible, and we still have a long way to go. We're still working it out, but every time I took a step, I started to experience more purpose, more meaning, and more richness to life than anything money could ever buy. And if you would have told me when I was back there that I would be here, I would say that there's no way it's possible, but God had more in store than what I had in mind, and as I followed him, I experienced it. God had more for me spiritually. He had more for me personally. He had more for me relationally than I could have ever imagined. And I believe the same is true for you. That God really does have more in store than what you have in mind. But if you want in on it, it's going to require you to follow. It's going to require you to take some steps in his direction. So maybe you need to take a step spiritually today. Maybe you heard Amanda's story, and the step that you need to take that you've been fighting for a really long time is going public with your faith through baptism. Maybe the step that you need to take is signing up to serve in an environment here at Gwinnett Church. Maybe the step for you is opening up your Bible again because it's been years since you've done it. Maybe your step is opening up for the first time. If you want to do that, we have Bibles for you in the gallery. You can grab one free of charge from us. Or maybe the step spiritually that you should take today is to go, okay, God, if you have more in store than what I have in mind, I surrender. I'll give you my life. I'll follow you. Or maybe your step is personally. Maybe there's some habits that you've been carrying for a really long time and you know that they are destroying you and everything in you says that I should take a step and get some help, but you're afraid to do it. Maybe that's the step that God's calling you to take today. Or maybe for some of you, there's some wounds and you need to process them with a counselor. And that's the step. Maybe the step is relational. Maybe it's a phone call to say, I'm sorry. Maybe it's a phone call to say, I forgive you, even though they don't deserve it. Maybe the step is saying no to some other things in your life so you can start saying yes to your family more. Here's the thing, I don't know what the step is for you, but here's what I know for sure, is that following Jesus will always lead to more. And if you will take a step in his direction, you will find yourself on the road to more, and you will look back a month from now, 3 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, and you'll have no idea how you became the person that you are and how you ended up where you were standing, but little steps over time led you to a life of more purpose, more meaning, and a richness to life that money could never offer. So the band's gonna come out, and we're gonna sing this song together called Follow You Anywhere. And it's just all about following Jesus. It's all about taking steps in his direction. It's all about knowing that we can trust where he is leading us. And maybe for you, the step today is to just engage in worship in a way that you never have before. Maybe it's to read the lyrics off the screens. Maybe it's to sing the words out loud. Maybe it's to hold your hands out like this to say, God, whatever you have for me, I receive it. Maybe it's to put your hands out like this to say, God, I surrender to you. Or maybe it's a moment where you just sit and pray. You say, God, would you give me the wisdom to know my next step? And then will you give me the courage to take it? Because following Jesus always leads to more. And following always starts with a step. Father, how incredible is it that you do see us individually, that you know us, that you love us, that you have a plan for us, and that while we dream and plan and make goals for ourselves, that you always have more in store than what we have in mind. I thank you that that's not an empty promise, that it's not as simple as us getting whatever we want. We know that that's not what's best for us, and you know that more than we do. But God, I really do believe that there's more for every person in this room. And I believe that as they choose to take steps in your direction, they can experience that more. So God, would you give us the wisdom to know what our next step is? Would you give us the courage to take it? As we follow you where you lead, would you give us the ability to trust you more? We love you. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen.